You may not be looking forward to it. I know it doesn't seem that way outside right now, but here before too long, it'll be time for something that you may wish you didn't have to do, and that's your house's annual spring cleaning. And some of you may not do that. I know many of us do, and of course the process is we just try to get rid of last year's clutter, or maybe the last 10 years, or 15 or 20 years clutter that we have accumulated. But even when we do so, you know exactly what's going to happen in the remainder of this year. Your same house is going to get filled up with more junk and more clutter again. Isn't it funny that it seems to constantly work that way with houses? Well, there's a reason for that, and really the design behind it is houses aren't made to be empty. Even when we clean things out of them, they're designed to be filled. And that's true not just with our bodies' dwellings, but as well it's accurate with our spirit's homes. And so whether you're talking about your earthly home or your spiritual dwelling, it really doesn't matter between one or the other. It's not really a question of if in the coming year you're going to have something in your house. The question is, what are you going to allow in your house? And of course, we're not going to be looking at it so much from the perspective of what are you going to put in your earthly home, but what are you going to allow to fill up your spiritual home in the coming year? I don't care who you are, in this coming year, you're going to have some things that accumulate in your home, your spiritual home, that's really not all that good. And you and I alike, we're going to have to work at trying to identify what those things are and cleaning those out of our spiritual abodes. And the good news is this: no matter how little, how much, or anywhere between, with God's help, we can remove evil from our spiritual dwellings. I want to build some on a lesson that we had last week that had to do with Jesus, and we used Luke chapter 11. Well, for today we're going to use Matthew's account, as was just read, from chapter 12, about in connection to Jesus casting this demon out of a man, what that means not only for people then, but also continuing today, what that means for you and me. I want to state up front, obviously we don't have demon possession occurring today like it did in Bible times. However, as we understand, God still works in our lives. He doesn't do it through miracles, but He does it through providence. We recently had a trimester on Wednesday nights for the adults about angels, the messengers of heaven. They still work today. Now, they don't do it in miraculous ways like they did in Bible times, but providentially, God still uses His servants to benefit His people today. Now, if God and His angels are still working in that light, what do you think Satan and his pawns, otherwise known as demons, are still doing today? Not in a miraculous or an unnatural way as they did in Bible times, but providentially, they're still at work today trying to influence us. Here's what Jesus has to say about evil spirits or evil influences in our lives. Matthew 12, verse 43. I like the word that's used here, kind of like what I mentioned a moment ago. Not a matter of if, but what. In this case, it's not a matter of if, but when. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man. So it's not just, well, hypothetically, it could occur, but it takes place on a regular basis with the help of God. Now, there are two ways of viewing this process. We can look at it more from the divine side of things, which really is the concentration of Matthew 12. Or we can look at it as we compare another passage with Matthew 12 in our second setting in Ephesians 4 with the human responsibility in order for this to occur. And so just for a moment, I want to flip over there. We won't be doing this a lot, but I do want to go over to Ephesians 4 and look at what's our responsibility in making sure evil influences leave our lives. The spiritual spring cleaning of our dwellings takes place. Ephesians 4, starting in verse 17. This I say, therefore, Paul writing, and testify to you in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles do, in the futility or the aimlessness of their minds, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And we're going to find from Ephesians 4, it's a real key. What we notice more so are our actions, whether ours or others, that are off. But the real matter is if there's wickedness alive and well, evil influences in our lives, the problem doesn't start with the actions. The problem starts with the heart. Who being past feeling have given themselves over to to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. Now the lewdness involves acts of sensuality, largely anyway. The uncleanness, though, that's more of a matter of the heart. It's involving oneself in sensuality, but in the mind, and entertaining desires that should not be entertained. With greediness, goes back to the love of money and the things that money can buy. Often these two things are connected. But, Paul says, you have not learned Christ. If indeed you have been taught by Him and have learned from Him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off your former conduct, which grows corrupt, that old man according to the deceitful desires. As I mentioned, we're piggybacking a little bit off of last week. Not one, but two lessons that we had. Do you recall how it is in the story of Amnon that sin and his temptation works with us? Looks good, sounds good, can't live without it. Those are the promises that sin, that evil makes to us. But once we give in to what those desires are, we find out that sin always overpromises and underdelivers. The reality is, even though it looked good and it seemed good, it's not good. And even though we thought we can't live without it, we could have lived without it. In fact, we'd have been better off if we'd have done so. Put off those deceitful lusts. Don't give in to them. You all, he's saying as Christians, we all have an obligation to put off our old conduct. That's how we kick evil out of our lives. But we understand Matthew 12, we can't do it all by ourselves, but we need God's help if we're truly going to receive forgiveness for the evil in which we participated. Evil can be removed from our homes. But once it goes out of our spiritual houses, like anyone or anything else, it's got to live somewhere. And so it's going to search for a new home. The entirety of verse 43 of Matthew 12 reads this way. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest, and finds none. The dry places, they're kind of like the wilderness through which the Israelites traveled for 40 years. It's like traveling across a desert. Now, if you, I hope this never happens to you, but if you were kicked out of your home and you had to travel across a desert to try to find a new home, do you think you're going to take up residence in that desert? Is it an inviting, hospitable place to you? There's an absence of water. There's an absence of television. There's an absence of lazy boy recliners. That's not a good place to make a home, right? Well, that's the way evil views once it leaves our spiritual homes. It goes searching for a new house, but it's like traveling across a desert. It's not any fun trying to find a new place. And when you have difficulty finding a new place to live, naturally you desire to go back to the former house where you were once welcomed. It's verse 44 of Matthew 12 that says this. Then the evil spirit speaks, aha, I know what I need to do. It's kind of like the prodigal son, except in a bad way. I will return to my house from which I came. Whoa, time out here. Whose house is that in which the evil once lived? That's our homes, isn't it? But it lived in our dwellings, in our spirits long enough that it actually feels like it's its home, and it tries to claim it for itself, even though in reality that is not the case. We might help make sense of it in looking at it in this regard. It's nice to go on vacation with your family or with people you really enjoy being around. That's kind of nice to do that, isn't it? Once or twice, maybe we get to do that in the course of a year. You have about a week for your getaway. The first 2 days, wherever you go, it feels like, hopefully anyway, it feels like it's paradise on earth. You might even have the conversation many people do, I think I could live here. What do you think about that? Well, as by the time day 7, especially 6 and 7 approach, are you kind of thinking more about what your real home is? And get it, for me, it's like day 3 probably max. I'm already thinking about my old home. Well, we do get to thinking about that, and if you're like I am, I can drive all night because I'm focused on getting back to what truly is my dwelling. I pull up into my driveway, you go up and you open the door and you've never seen anything and you've never smelled anything that smells so good, even if your home really doesn't smell that good. It smells like home and it looks like home. Well, that's the way an evil spirit is. When we open the door and we kick the evil influence out of our lives and it goes searching for a new home and it can't find it, well, just imagine what it feels like once it's been gone, not for a matter of days and weeks, but months and years. Oh, I miss home. It pulls up on the driveway and it knocks on our door, and what kind of a reception, if any, will it get from us? Hopefully it's not a situation like Jesus goes on to describe in verse 44. When evil comes, and it so happens that he finds that spiritual home empty, swept, and put in order, that sounds good because that's a spiritual spring cleaning that's occurred. But if it's left in that state, that's actually, Jesus is teaching, a recipe for disaster. It's just like outside of a rental property. If you were to evict some people who aren't doing as they should, you want to get that place filled, but you want to get it filled with good people. And if you have trouble getting it filled with good people, well, people who aren't going to be good renters, bad renters, they're going to keep applying until one of them gets accepted. And that's kind of the idea here, that once we purge our spiritual homes of evil, if we don't fill our homes with good things so that the house is full, that evil is going to come right back to our homes, and it's going to come knocking again. And all that evil needs is just a little bit of open space in order to inhabit and in order to thrive in our lives, even if we've kicked wickedness out of our lives before. Verse 45, then he goes, that evil influence or that evil spirit, and takes with him 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. That's not a good scenario, is it? But that's exactly what happens when we remove evil from our lives. A void naturally is left. If we don't fill that empty spot with good, eventually evil is going to come back in, and it's going to be 7 times worse than what it was in the first place. Brothers and sisters, what we have here is, I'm convinced, one of the most helpful, one of the most applicable, yet one of the most neglected teachings of all of Christianity. The absolute imperative nature that every time we remove something evil from our lives, there's going to be an empty spot in our homes that's left. And unless we fill that void in our spiritual homes with something positive and something good, that evil is going to come back knocking, and it's going to find a home. It's going to take up residence, just like it was before, only this time it's going to be way worse than what it was originally. Let's make just a practical application of the matter. Let's say we become Christians, and the evil has been purged out of our lives, and we recognize that one of the reasons we were struggling so much with sinful choices is because we were surrounding ourselves with the wrong kind of people. And so we decided it's not that we're going to remove them from acquaintances in our lives. We still don't love and care about those people, and we never talk to them again. It's not something like that. But we also understand that we need to start limiting our time that we spend around those bad influences, and they're not going to be our closest friends anymore. Many Christians, especially young ones, come to that realization very early, and that's a great observation. That does need to take place. I can't tell you how many times I've seen when new Christians do remove those negative influences with their lives, they forget about it, or maybe they haven't been taught yet the importance of plugging in good, godly influences in their lives. Don't really go out of their way to make new friends in the church. And as we're talking in our class, sometimes that's on us as well. Maybe we don't go out of our way to really become close friends with them. And so there is a void that's left in their lives, and because they're lonely, eventually they see, I need friends. And if I don't have Christian ones, what other option is there? They go back to those first influences they had, and the lifestyle ends up being even worse than what it was the first time. No matter what it is, whether it's friends or anything else, when we remove an evil influence with our lives, we have to plug in something that's the equal opposite and a positive in its place, or this whole Christianity thing isn't going to work. In this case, verse 45 goes on to say, the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be, Jesus says, with this wicked generation. Now, we looked just a moment ago in Ephesians chapter 4, and for the rest of our study, I want to go back to that spot. There really is a good parallel to be drawn. It's described here, again, going back to the miracle and the casting out of the demon. God helps us in what we can't do for ourselves, removing evil from our lives, helping us to implement good. But we do have personal responsibility in the matter. Ephesians chapter 4, we have to put off the old man who grows corrupt according to the deceitful desires. We have to be willing to give up sin in order for God to help us. Or some like to put it this way, that we have to be willing to help ourselves before God will help us. Yes, get rid of the evil. But notice what Ephesians 4 goes on to say. Verses 23 and 24. And be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Remember where the fixing of the actions really begins, not with the actions, but with the heart. You have to change the way you think about things. Change the way you think about evil, and understand sin is always going to overpromise and underdeliver, without exception. Understand that righteousness is always the best option. We have to start thinking along that line if we're going to stop doing so much sin and we're going to start doing so much more right. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Don't just put off sin, but remember to put on the new man who is created, or you might view it as being recreated, according to the image of God in true righteousness and holiness. Yes, identify what sin is and expunge it from your existence, but also identify what righteousness is and fill your life full of it. Because if your life is full of anything, there's no other room for anything else to creep in. And if it's full of righteousness, good deeds, there's no room for sin to squeeze its way back in. But when we purge our lives of evil and we don't replace it with righteousness, there's plenty of room for evil to come crawling right back in to our spiritual homes. I'm going to give 3 suggestions this morning, which are scriptural ones. But as well, I give these three suggestions on the basis of observation. And I don't want you to think I feel like I'm a wise old grandpa standing before you can tell you. I'm not that kind of person. I realize that. I'm 32 years old. I do have about a little shy of 20 years experience as a Christian, and about 30 years experience hands-on in the church of our Lord. I know there are people who are far more qualified to speak on this matter. But I speak to you from the standpoint of biblical advice, and as well my limited experience of what I've observed through the years. And here's of what I've taken note. That once we expel evil from our lives, that if we'll take advantage of every worship and every Bible study opportunity that the church provides. We have roughly, maybe it's too much, you'd see, but we have roughly 3 hours on the first day of the week that takes place, about an hour on Wednesday nights. We have SYC in the summer, we have Summer Sing in the summer, we have Vacation Bible School in the summer. We have a lot going on in the summer, don't we? But we have a lot of different opportunities like this that the church provides. Take it, if you haven't done so yet, take advantage of every one of these worshipful and Bible study opportunities to fill your life full of these good, righteous, positive things. Number 1. Number 2, take advantage of every service opportunity that the church provides. We have a lot of them. Trunk or Treat occurs in October is one of them. Vacation Bible School decorating, that's a great one that we need every now and then. We need transportation for people to and from services. These are good. If you haven't done so yet, I'd really encourage you to attend one of the monthly nursing home singings that we have. And I don't know what your viewpoint on this is, but I went into it from the standpoint of will these elderly citizens of our community who don't get to get out on a regular, for some don't get to get out of the dwelling at all, we need to go there and spread some cheer to them. Initially, that's how I saw it. I see it a little differently now. That's my number one objective, I will say still. But what I found is I get more out of that, I'm convinced, than what those people do. They love it, and they'll thank you for being there. You really brighten their day, their week, their whole month. But you'll find that you come out probably even more encouraged than what they are. we go after and we eat at a restaurant together, and we visit and share some good memories and some laughs together. And it's a great time. If you haven't done it yet, take advantage of that. If you haven't baked a dish yet for the desserts for the senior citizen dinners, do that. When you get the opportunity, go and visit and mingle with the community who comes in and eats there and with the staff. Take advantage of all of these opportunities to serve that the church provides. Number 2. Number 3, I'm going to challenge every one of us, yours truly included, to really get outside of our comfort zones here. In this coming year, have members, whether a family or several individuals who are members of this church, into your home, or go into another member or members' homes one time every week. And don't just sit around for your invitation. Okay, just say, well, nobody ever invited me, so that's why I didn't do it. Well, if they haven't invited you, then you give the invitation to someone that week. And if nobody invites you the next week, you give the invitation to them again. Not the same people, but to other people. But spend one night a week in other members' homes or them inside your home. Share a meal together and spend just a couple of hours visiting with one another. Here's why I suggest these 3 things. Brothers and sisters, I've never known a single Christian person who, while taking advantage of every worship and every Bible study opportunity that the church provided, who taking advantage of every church service in the true sense of the word, church service opportunity that a congregation provided, I've never known any member who, while showing Christian hospitality on a weekly basis or going into other people's homes, I've never known a single Christian to fall away from the Lord doing that. I don't believe it ever will happen. But I can't even begin to tell you the numbers in that limited experience of 20 to 30 years that I've seen who stopped interacting with Christian people on a regular basis, who stopped serving with the church on a regular basis, who stopped attending Bible studies and worship services on a regular basis. I can't even begin to tell you the number of those I've seen fall away. It's astronomical. Jesus tells us it's important that for every evil thing we take out, we replace it with the equal opposite of something that's good. Because if we will do that, I'm confident, not only based on what the Scriptures teach, but as well what we can observe around us, that we will always be true to the Lord. I want us to go through just a little bit here, Ephesians 4. Notice that for every evil thing we're told to get rid of it, we're told about a good thing that's to replace that void. Ephesians 4:25. Put away lying. That's a bad thing, right? But don't make the decision, okay, well, I've struggled with lying in the past, so I'm never going to open my mouth and speak another word. We're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to speak good things if we do that. Instead, let each one of you, that's a command, speak the positive, the equal opposite of that, truth, with his neighbor. Get rid of the evil lying, but replace it with good speech. Or this Christianity thing doesn't work out, even if you try to get rid of lying. Verses 26 and 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. You know, when we allow the devil to have a foothold or his evil agents in our lives, we will entertain anger day after day. We will allow anger to influence our speech and our actions to a sinful degree. Get rid of that, is what the writer's saying. Get rid of the evil, but replace it with good, righteous anger. You recognize the construction of these two words right here? That's actually a command. Be angry. Not all the time. He's saying there are times and there are things about which we should be angry. But when you are angry, deal with it. Don't hold on to it day after day. Don't allow it to negatively influence your speech and your actions. Get rid of sinful anger and replace it with righteous anger. Verse 28, let him who stole steal no longer. That's a bad thing. Get rid of the evil, but replace it with the equal opposite. What's good? Rather let him labor, working with his hands, that he may have something to give to him who has need. Regardless of whether you work, you're going to have needs in this life that have to be satisfied. And if you don't do the good thing by working to have what's needed to satisfy those requirements, then you're going to have to take something that doesn't belong to you and that belongs to somebody else to satisfy it. It's one or the other, something that's evil. Think about where the most amount of theft takes place just in our own country. And where you have the highest rates of theft, have you ever noticed that you also have the highest rates of unemployment? That's not by accident. There's a connection to be found there. When there's not enough good and working hard with one's hands, we're talking about able-bodied people, when there's not that good that's taking place, naturally that void is going to be filled in by evil because people still have needs. Get rid of the evil and taking from others and replace it with something that's good for able-bodied people. Work with your own hands. Verse 29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth. That's a bad thing. But what is good, that's the equal opposite that's positive, for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Boy, do we have a good discussion in our morning Bible class about gossip, slander, and backbiting. I believe what James chapter 3 teaches, don't you? And regardless of age and regardless of gender, it's the most difficult thing probably with which all human beings struggle. The effort to tame the tongue. It seems to be an untamable, unruly evil. We all struggle with that. Why do we have such difficulty, though, in saying things that we shouldn't about others and running them down? Is it not because probably we're not spending enough time saying positive things about others that will build them up? Because if we fill our time and our mouths with doing that, we're not going to have the time and opportunity to do the reverse with it. How do we fix the evil once we get it out of our lives? Replace it with the equal opposite, which is good. Ephesians 4:31 and 32, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. Really, you can kind of see this as a progression. First of all, I'm going to hang on to some hard feelings towards somebody based on something that happened in the past. I'm not going to address it with that person. I'm just going to stay mad at them. Maybe not just furious, but I'm going to stay mad at them. I'm going to hang on to those feelings. Well, eventually that turns into fury. And that turns into outbursts of anger, part of which would be clamor, which is loud shouting at one another. And when you're angry at each other and is harbored over the course of many weeks, months, maybe even years, and you start yelling at each other, you're probably going to say some things about one another that you shouldn't. Let all of these things, starting with the root cause of bitterness, be put away from you with all malice, which in the end is an intense form of bitterness. It's very difficult to overcome. Don't worry about ever getting to the step of malice by addressing bitterness as it arises in your heart. Put out the evil from your spiritual home, but replace it with the equal opposite. You can kind of trace it from that point and work your way backward now. Instead of being mean toward each other, be kind to one another. Instead of hating one another, be tender-hearted or caring toward each other. Instead of harboring malice and bitterness toward one another, instead forgive each other, just as God in Christ was so kind to forgive you. Yes, get rid of the evil influence, but don't forget to fill your home in that void with something that's good. Otherwise, evil is going to come knocking at your door again. If it comes back the second time and you let it in, it's going to be 7 times worse than what it was the first time. We give a lot of attention to getting rid of the evil, and we should. That's something that we need to do. As a Christian, and you look at your own life today, what evil do you see that you need to get rid of in your spiritual home? 1 John 1 tells us in verse 9 that if we will do something about the matter, attempt to fix it, but as well not to forget God's role in it, and we'll acknowledge to Him whatever evil has taken place in our lives, no matter what that evil is or how much of it is, He will help us get rid of all of it in the spiritual spring cleaning with which He will aid us if we'll let Him do it. But let's not forget that as we get rid of the evil things in our home, all the clutter that's been left over, we have to fill those voids. Because if we don't do so, evil's going to come back, and it's going to be worse the second time. Have you begun construction of your solid spiritual home? It's like we sang just a moment ago, Jesus is our firm foundation. He truly is that granite rock, the bedrock on which the perfect spiritual home can be built. And Jesus says we do that in Matthew 7 when we listen to what He says and we carry out His teachings. Is your trust in Jesus? Do you want to live like He does? If so, you're a candidate for the construction of your spiritual home to begin, according to Jesus, Matthew 28:19, by being baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. The construction of your spirit's eternal dwelling can begin this very day. You know what the number one thing is, though, that holds people back from building a home? Cost. It's just too expensive. You know, Romans 6:23 tells us that when we do our part and we accept what God gives to us, the cost for all that home has already been paid with the life of God's Son. You don't have to worry about the bill. It's already been footed. This morning, if you would like to begin construction of your solid spiritual home, or if you could use an extra hand or look around you, an extra 140 hands to help you clean up your house and getting rid of the evil, or even in aiding you putting good, righteous things into your existence, we're here to help you in that effort if you'll come.